the day authority was rewritten. It didn't arrive with resistance or rebellion. There were no protests, no dramatic exits, no visible struggle for control. Authority was rewritten quietly, through policy updates, structural refinements, and language that sounded progressive, reasonable, inevitable. By the time anyone noticed, the shift was already complete. Power doesn't always fall. Sometimes it evolves itself out of recognition. The billionaire at the center of this moment believed authority was permanent as long as results followed. The empire was performing. Markets were stable. Confidence remained high. From the outside, leadership appeared intact. But beneath the surface, something fundamental was being redefined, not who led, but what leadership even meant. The reveal began with reform. Advisors proposed updates to governance, framed as modernization, clearer accountability, shared responsibility, resilience against individual failure. The language was compelling, the logic sound. The billionaire approved the changes, proud to be building a future-proof organization. At first, nothing felt different. Decisions still moved. Initiatives launched. The billionaire remained visible, respected, consulted. Authority didn't feel threatened. It felt refined. Distributed leadership promised strength, not dilution. The empire seemed more balanced, less dependent on any one figure. But reform has a hidden edge. The new structure didn't remove authority. It redefined it. Leadership became collective. Influence became contextual. Decisions were no longer driven by position, but by process. The billionaire noticed subtle changes, approvals taking longer, priorities shifting without direct input, outcomes shaped by consensus rather than conviction. Still, it felt responsible. The reveal sharpened during a strategic pivot. The billionaire proposed a move rooted in long-term instinct rather than immediate metrics. In the past, this would have defined direction. Now, it became one voice among many. The proposal was discussed, evaluated, and ultimately reshaped beyond recognition. No one disagreed. That was the unsettling part. Authority hadn't been challenged. It had been rewritten. What once meant leading now meant aligning. What once meant deciding now meant facilitating. The billionaire was still present, but the center had moved, and the empire was already learning to operate without a single author of its future. The question was no longer whether authority had changed. It was whether anyone remembered when it did, and the cost of that realization was only beginning to surface. The transition revealed itself through tone rather than policy. Meetings sounded different. Language shifted from conviction to calibration. Leaders spoke about balance instead of direction, alignment instead of momentum. The billionaire listened, recognizing the words as intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply limiting. The reveal deepened when decisions no longer carried authorship. Outcomes emerged from committees, shaped by frameworks, owned by no one. Success became collective. Failure became abstract. Authority diffused so evenly that it lost its edge. The system functioned smoothly, but without a spine. At first, the billionaire adapted. They learned the new language, framed ideas to survive consensus, tempered instinct with accommodation. What once would have been a decisive call became a proposal crafted to avoid friction. It worked. The system approved more often, but each approval came with compromise. The conflict sharpened during a moment of urgency. A sudden shift in the market demanded speed, not perfection, not alignment, speed. The billionaire recognized the pattern instantly. This was the kind of moment that defined leaders or erased them. They called for action, clear and direct. The system responded with caution. Risk assessments multiplied. Scenarios expanded. Discussions extended. No one opposed the move outright, but no one moved quickly either. The structure designed to protect against individual error now protected against individual leadership. The opportunity faded. Afterward, no one took responsibility. The system absorbed the loss without blame. The reports framed it as prudence. Stability was preserved. But the billionaire felt something deeper break. This wasn't about one missed chance. It was about accountability. Without authority, no one could be wrong. Without ownership, no one could lead. The billionaire realized the reform had rewritten more than power. It had rewritten consequence. Decisions were safe because they were shared, but safety had become the ceiling. Nothing sharp could pass through. The emotional weight settled slowly. The billionaire was still visible, still respected, still influential, but no longer decisive. Authority had not been taken. It had been dissolved. And dissolving power does not make it disappear. It simply ensures no one can use it when it matters most. The conflict was no longer hidden. It was structural. And the next step would require confronting a truth few leaders accept. Shared authority protects organizations, but it can also paralyze them. The question was whether this rewritten authority could still act, or whether it had already forgotten how. The conflict reached its breaking point when the empire faced a moment that demanded unmistakable leadership. A convergence of risks, regulatory pressure, market volatility, and technological disruption arrived all at once. This was not a scenario for alignment workshops or extended deliberation. It was a moment for clarity, for choosing a direction and committing to it without hesitation. The billionaire felt the urgency immediately. Experience sharpened instinct. Patterns aligned. The move was clear. They articulated it decisively, expecting the structure to respond. It didn't. Instead, the system slowed itself down. Subcommittees formed. Impact analyses were requested. External advisors were brought in. Each step was justified. Each delay defensible. But together, they created a vacuum where leadership should have been. The emotional toll was unmistakable. The billionaire watched as responsibility dispersed into abstraction. No one opposed the plan. No one endorsed it fully either. Authority had been rewritten so thoroughly that even crisis could not summon a decisive voice. Then came the moment that exposed everything. A mid-level executive, operating within a new framework, paused a critical action to seek further alignment. That pause, brief, procedural, perfectly compliant, triggered a cascade of misresponses. Regulators advanced without engagement. Competitors capitalized on hesitation. The empire lost ground it had never intended to surrender. In the aftermath, no one was blamed. Reports framed the outcome as unavoidable. Processes were reviewed, safeguards reinforced. The system learned nothing because no one had been allowed to be wrong. The billionaire felt a quiet fury beneath the surface, not at individuals, but at the architecture itself. Authority had been rewritten in the name of resilience, but it had erased the one function that mattered most under pressure: decision in a private moment. The billionaire confronted the truth they had been avoiding. The reform had achieved its stated goal. The company no longer depended on a single leader, but it had also lost the ability to act when consensus was too slow. Leadership without authority was performance. Authority without ownership was illusion. The emotional peak settled into resolve. If authority had been rewritten once, it could be rewritten again, but this time not to protect against leaders, to empower them. The next move would not be popular. It would not be safe, and it would force the empire to choose between comfort and consequence. The only question left was whether the billionaire was willing to challenge the very structure they had approved and reclaim something that could not be optimized: the right to decide. The climax arrived with a decision that cut against everything the reform had promised. In a decisive address to senior leadership, the billionaire acknowledged what the crisis had made undeniable. Shared authority had strengthened stability, but it had weakened action. The empire had become resilient and slow, safe and hesitant, protected and vulnerable in moments that demanded speed. Then the billionaire did something no one expected. They rewrote authority again, not back to absolute control, not to ego-driven command, but to accountable leadership, clear ownership, defined decision rights that activated under pressure. When speed mattered, authority would concentrate. When stability mattered, it would distribute. Leadership would no longer dissolve into process when consequences were real. The reaction was immediate and tense. Some executives resisted, fearing regression. Others welcomed clarity they had quietly missed. Advisors warned of backlash. Analysts predicted internal friction. But the billionaire understood something fundamental. Organizations don't fail because they choose authority. They fail because they pretend no one needs it. The changes rolled out quickly. Crisis protocols empowered specific leaders. Decision thresholds were clarified. Responsibility returned to named individuals. For the first time since the reform, action regained momentum. Not every decision was perfect, but decisions were made and owned. The resolution unfolded through contrast. The empire did not become reckless. It became decisive. Teams knew when to align and when to act. Leadership regained meaning, not as dominance, but as responsibility under pressure. The system learned how to move again. The billionaire watched the shift with quiet clarity. Authority, they realized, is not a relic of the past. It is a tool, dangerous when unchecked, useless when denied. The mistake was never sharing power. The mistake was forgetting that someone must carry it when the moment demands courage. The empire stabilized, stronger for having faced its own paralysis. And the lesson settled deeply, not just for one company, but for every organization that believes structure alone can replace leadership. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The day